Hello, my name is Andy and I am the Village Idiot. I'm armed with a car and a GoPro and an unhealthy amount of time on my hands. I'm using that time to attempt to visit every civil parish in England. You're watching the Huntingdonshire series, a district of Cambridgeshire which contains 81 civil parishes. Without further ado, let's dive into one of them. Welcome back to Huntingdonshire once again, people. Now in this one, we're beginning pretty much at the end of the road, and I'll show you why it's the end of the road, because this is as far down as I can drive. I can't go any further than here because this road becomes private, okay? So beyond this point, I can't access it. But what I can access is right next door to it, and that is the church. And that's where we're beginning, the parish of Haddune. Here's my disclaimer for people who may be watching me for the first time. I say things as I would in my native accent and dialect. As a result, I may not pronounce things in the same way as the locals do. Remember, I'm a visitor. It's impossible to know everything. Leave me a comment, spin me a like and bash that subscribe button. Let's get to today's parish video. Okay, so last week we explored Morborne, a tiny village which sits just to the south of Haddon, an equally small location some 8 miles away from Peterborough. Haddon is situated near the Great North Road, close to Cambridgeshire's border with Northamptonshire. It's bounded by both Brook and Ermine Street. It's gone by a few names over the centuries. In the 12th century, this place was named Haddune, which became Adone some 4 centuries later, before eventually commuting to Haddon. Haddon is similar in many ways to Morborne. It has a tiny population of less than 100, a decent amount of arable farmland, and very few, if any, amenities. However, one thing that sets it apart from its southern neighbour would be how the village is laid out. Morborne is a linear string of houses, but Haddon is much more of a cluster. The village is noted for the Church of St Mary, which is where we begin this episode. And finally, we were able to get inside a church here in Huntingdonshire. Also within its boundaries is a service station on the A1M, which isn't the easiest thing to get to from the village, as I'll explain later in this video. It's another tiny, peaceful village in Huntingdonshire. What's not to love? We start at the Church of St Mary. This consists of a chancel, a nave with a western extension, north transept, south transept, north aisle, south aisle, belfry and north porch. The walls are made from stone rubble and the roofs are covered with lead and slates. The church is mentioned in the Domesday Book. Its chancel arch dates from the 12th century. Early in the 13th century, the north aisle and transept were added and an arcade was built on the lines of an old north wall. Some 30 years later, the same thing was done on the south side, albeit slightly differently. St Mary's has been restored 3 times, in 1745, 1897 and 1901. Whilst the village has no war memorial, the church does contain a memorial window. There are some bits of interest in here. Lying loose inside the church is a carved stone figure of a lion, which is believed to have come from a monument. Outside on the churchyard wall is the greater part of a coped coffin lid. So we're both in the church here. Nikki's just filming her video, which came out a bit ago. I'm going to leave her to it at this point. I'm going to head off into the rest of the village. So if you haven't seen Nikki's video, go and check it out, because it will have all of this wonderful church within it. Nikki will have done a fantastic job of taking you around it, so I'll leave her to it. And just like last week, here's an excerpt from Nikki's video. If you've not seen it yet, it's linked below.
Village. This one is another church that's dedicated to St Mary. So I'm going to come out here and take a look at, again, some of the very old graves that are in here and see what we can see. So just literally outside the door of the church we have a couple, again, I often find them in churchyards, lots of matching headstones, and here you've got Samuel Rowell, aged 79, and Amy Rowell, aged 85, that both passed away sort of early part of the 20th century. And then there's another Amy Rowell here who died in 1916. So I'm going to have a walk around and see if I can find any other markers that catch my eye. Okay, so here I found a small sort of patch of graves that all appear to belong to the Roberts family. So there's this one here which I can't really make out. The writing is incredibly degraded. There's a tiny one here which is pretty much sunken, and again the writing's degraded, but given their tomb's proximity to that tomb there, which is for a Edward Robert Roberts, and this one here for Theodosia, the wife of William Roberts. I think it's safe to assume that these are all part of the same family, and given that they are very close to the outer wall of the chancel of the church as well, beautiful Norman church there, they must have had quite either some local connection or some influence, or may even been like a local landowning family or something, which has sort of given rise to their very good position here in the churchyard. So going into sort of slightly sunnier parts of this churchyard. It's by no means full, but that doesn't mean, well, I said by no means full. It's by no means full of markers, but that doesn't mean to say it's got no burials in the unmarked areas. But the difficulty is here is that a lot of the signs are very degraded. A lot of the graves are, the writings are covered in lichen and moss, or and they're just simply, they're like markers that an individual is here, but we can't go and see them very clearly, which is a great shame. There are a few over this side which are a little bit more clear. So this one was Anne, the lady who passed away, the wife of William, May 28th, 1916, aged 28. Lost a while, our treasured love, gained forever, safe above. It's quite nice. And then we have over here we have an Eliza, the wife of Thomas, who died in 1912, aged 52, and then Thomas, who died in 1924.
St Mary's Church was once the possession of Thorney Abbey, as was the Manor of Haddon. Both were given to the abbey by King Edgar, and they remained in its possession until the dissolution of the monasteries. Haddon Village is one of these places which doesn't have any street names. A lot of the village's addresses use the village name. For example, walking up the road, you pass number 1 Haddon, number 2 Haddon, number 3 Haddon, etc. Of course, it's way too small to sustain any kind of amenities, other than the church. It does though have a standalone postbox, and just like last week in Morborne, this is a Victorian postbox, signified by the letters VR. Despite this, Adone does have a few businesses. They're generally farms, but according to Google, there's also Neen Valley Classics here, a classic car specialist who will sort anything from a simple repair to a full fabrication. So I think we probably class this as a parish notice board. It's a very small one, but there we go. Card on the board, job done. Now I find this board quite interesting because it's got the services at the church here on it as well, and underneath there's a thing about the National Cycle Network. We're on Route 53 here, and next to that there's a sign that's got a roundel on top of it. It says Haddon there. It's directing you towards Elton and Oundle one way and Norman Cross the other way. I guess you could call this the village green. It may be small, but it's still very attractive. I was loving the very patriotic flagpole and how well this is kept. Now the next thing to see here has absolutely nothing out there about it, so this is a pure guess, I'm afraid. You can see above the houses there's a building with a bell turret. Now from previous experience that's got to be either an old chapel or an old school, but either way it's not in use any longer. It's been turned into a house. The genealogists amongst you might be interested to know that a family by the name of de Haddon was living in Haddon in the 14th century. A man by the name of Geoffrey de Haddon appears in judicial records in 1300. And at this house with a very attractive well, which Nikki spotted on our way in, that's the end of the village. The road runs off to the west towards Elton at this point, crossing Billing Brook on its way. It's a lovely little place, this. Well, to say this is a really small place, I've had quite a bit of interest from the local people. 3 people have stopped me, even at a place this small, to ask me what I'm doing, which is unheard of, really. I didn't get 3 people stopping me in Stilton. Nobody stopped me in Stilton, and you know how big that place was. But yeah, obviously they're quite excited about the fact that this video is being made. Haddon is being put on the map. Now this is pretty much where the village sort of ends here. Around this bend it sort of runs off into the countryside and hits a road which takes you down towards Morborne. It's the road I came in on. So this is about as far as I'm going to walk. So from here I'll be turning around and going back the other way. And that's really it for the village, although there is something else within Haddon's boundaries which is worth catching, and that's Peterborough services on the A1, so I'll be heading out there next. Okay, so I've walked back to the church. Nikki is supposed to be meeting me on this bench in a moment. I fully expected her to be here already, but apparently I was quicker than her. Anyway, it gives me a chance to talk about this, because this bench is in loving memory of John George Jack Smith, who lived from 1920 until 2013. Countryman, that was probably his nickname, and he loved living here. Do you know what? I love finding things like this, because this is the kind of thing that gives a village, you know, a locality, a personal touch. You know, you don't find this everywhere. And it's great to see. It's great to see that, you know, village locals are remembered in this way. So, yeah, John George Jack Smith, countryman. I'm going to use your bench, Mr. Smith, to sit and wait for Mrs. Smith, for the missus, for Nikki to get back here. And then we can go to Peterborough services and end this episode. And 5 minutes later, Nikki reappears from the churchyard. Hello, Nikki.
It wasn't even 5 minutes. I was actually sat in the church porch, and I saw him come up. I saw him through the hedge, so I just scooted around the back of the church expecting to meet him at the car, and I'm like, oh hey, he's disappeared.
Well, I
heard you.
Did you?
Yeah, I heard you say Mrs. Smith.
Yeah.
Which I'm presuming is me.
Yes, because I was talking about this bench that we're currently sat on. Because as you can probably see, it's got something written on it.
Dedicated to a Smith.
Yes, indeed, another Smith. We're going to rule the world eventually. We will. Yes. How many people do you think live in this village, Nikki?
I don't know, about 50-ish, 60, maybe 100 at a push. It's very small.
3 people asked me what I was doing here. That's a very high percentage, isn't it, when you compare it to a place like Stilton, for example, which has quite a few people, and nobody asked me what I was doing there. Okay, so we'll sit here for a few minutes and just recuperate, and then we will head to Peterborough Services to end this episode. Just before we left the village behind, I was quite curious as to whether or not this field might have been a patch of earthworks. If it is, it's nothing that I was able to pin down during my research. Now let's go to the services. To get to Peterborough Services from Haddon village, you've got two route options, but whichever way you go, you have to leave Haddon's boundaries and then re-enter them. The upgraded stretch of the A1 that passes these was opened in 1998, with no service areas. Peterborough Services was proposed in 1989, but wouldn't open until January of 2001. Its initial facilities included a newsagent, a cafe, and a petrol station that was sold to Shell in 2008. These days it's much bigger. It's owned and operated by Extra, who currently hold planning permission to build a drive-through Costa here, which is expected to be built in 2023. It'll be one of the first Costa drive-through stores at an Extra site. So this was all part of the plan to end this episode here at about this time, because it is about dinner time for some food, and obviously time for a toilet stop too, because we've been at it all morning. Now I'm not going to be filming inside the services because it's private property, you're not really allowed to. It's dodgy enough filming outside, but I think this is probably just about allowable. So we're going to head inside and find some food, find a toilet, and I'll see you on the outside in a few moments time again. We've stopped at Peterborough Services many times before on our travels, so we know it well. I can recommend Chopsticks Noodle Bar. Also in here, there's a McDonald's, a KFC, an M&S Simply Food, and a host of other shops too. So we are refreshed, aren't we, Nikki?
Yep, nice bit of Chinese food, nipped to the ladies' room, or the little boys' room.
In my case, yes. Yep. Okay, that's been the parish of Haddon. Not a very complicated one, but quite complicated to get to these services, because from the village you have to go out of Haddon parish to come back into it again. No matter which way you go, there are two ways you can do it, and both ways you have to go out of the boundaries to come back into them again.
Going around China to get to Japan.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. So yeah, definitely a weird boundary situation. And on the subject of weird boundaries, we've got time to do a fifth village while we're down here in Huntingdonshire, and this next one is probably one of the weirdest boundaries I've ever seen. I'll explain it in the early going in the episode, which you'll see next year, by the way. So let's get on and do it. I've been Andy, also known as the Village Idiot. This has been the Parish of Haddon, and I'm out.